Here are some facts about me. We broke up, but I still loved her. I gave everything to my family, but they still resisted my will. I left my soldiers, it almost ended in tragedy. They betrayed me and sent me to certain death. All facts are truth. I am Napoleon Bonaparte, a French military leader and emperor who rose to prominence during the French Revolution. I became the ruler of France and led it through a series of military campaigns, shaping European history significantly. I am ashamed of some things, and some things almost destroyed me. However, it is an integral part of my life. It proves that famous people have the same problems and life challenges as everyone else. Now all about it in more detail. Section 1, we broke up, but I still loved her. Ah, Josephine, mon amour, my queen, my ruin. How cruel a jest the gods play, that a man who could command armies and conquer empires could not hold on to the heart of the one he cherished most. Do you hear me now, Josephine, wherever you may be? Do you know the torment I carry still? They called me a tyrant, a monster, a man of unyielding ambition, but none of them saw how I softened in your presence. You were the sun to my stormy skies, the melody in my moments of silence. Yet, for all that I gave, for all that I sacrificed, we unraveled, thread by painful thread. Do you remember, Josephine, how we met in the chaos of revolution? You, a widow of the guillotine's cruel bite, and I, a young general hungry for glory. France was in turmoil, and I was caught in the fire of ambition, a man determined to rise. You, a woman with a past marked by tragedy, had your own scars, but also a strength that drew me in. I fell not for your beauty alone but for the spirit behind those eyes. You were grace, wit, and fire. I was helpless against you. From the moment I saw you, I knew I wanted you in my life, that you would be a part of my story, no matter what price I had to pay. Yet, love is a battlefield far more treacherous than any I've faced. Your betrayals, those whispered names that were not mine, cut deeper than the swords of my enemies. The rumors that surrounded you, the men who came before me and perhaps after, they tormented me in ways no enemy could. I, too, was guilty of failing you. My absences, my hungers for power and conquest, they drew a chasm between us, one we could not bridge. I was so consumed with shaping my legacy, with building an empire, that I neglected the woman who had once been my refuge from the world's chaos. In my pursuit of greatness, I became blind to the very thing that had made me human, my love for you. And yet, there was more. Then came the bitterest wound of all. No child. No heir to carry my name, my legacy. France demanded a dynasty, and I, her servant, had to obey. I was a man driven by the desire to leave something greater than myself behind, something to endure beyond the military campaigns, beyond the wars. But you could not give me that, Josephine. It was not enough to love you, to adore you, for my name to live on in our love alone. The crown, the empire, demanded more. France needed an heir, a child to inherit the future of the empire I was building. When I signed the decree of our divorce, my heart bled more fiercely than on any battlefield. I let you go, not for lack of love, but because duty chained my soul. The throne called to me, and as much as I longed to hold on to you, I had to sacrifice you to secure my future. You were never just a wife to me, Josephine. You were a muse, a companion who saw me not as the emperor I was becoming but as the man I had once been, a man who could still dream, still love, still feel. But in the end, I had to choose between love and empire. When I married Marie-Louise of Austria, it was not out of love, but out of necessity, the weight of the empire on my shoulders. I knew it would not be the same, but what choice did I have? I could not risk the future of France for my own desires. And yet, I never stopped loving you. Even as I stood at the altar with another, my heart was still yours. Your name was the last word I whispered in moments of despair. It is said that great men are shaped by sacrifice, but oh, the cost, Josephine. The cost. No victory, no conquest, no crown could fill the emptiness that your absence left in my heart. I was crowned Emperor of the French, but without you by my side, what did it all matter? My dreams of an empire were incomplete without the woman who had once shared them with me. He picks up the letter, folds it, and places it in a small box with other keepsakes. They say history remembers men like me for our victories and defeats. But history will never know this, that my greatest triumph and my greatest failure were one and the same, loving you, and losing you. It was not the Battle of Austerlitz or the conquest of Europe that defined me, but the love I lost in the quiet moments between battles, in the stillness of the night when I would think of you. In those moments, it was not the empire I ruled, but the woman I could never have again. The years have passed, and the world has forgotten much. They have forgotten the man I was before Napoleon Bonaparte, the young, ambitious general who rose from nothing to command all of Europe. But there are still moments, Josephine, when I remember you. When I hear the name Josephine, I do not think of a queen or a former empress. I think of the woman I loved, the woman who was with me through my most difficult years, the woman who shaped my life more than any battle ever could. They call me the conqueror of Europe, the man who built an empire, but they do not know the cost. They do not know the price of ambition. They do not know how it feels to stand on the highest throne and still feel empty inside. That was my burden, Josephine. To conquer the world, yet never have you by my side to share in the victory. In the end, it was not the French Empire that I wanted to build, but a life with you. A life where we could leave behind the cruelty of the world, a world that would never let us be. But I failed. And now, as I look back, I see that the legacy I built was not the one I wanted, it was the one I was forced to create. You were the woman who gave me everything, and I was the man who could never give you what you truly wanted. I hope you found peace after I left you, though I know that peace was never truly possible for either of us. They say men like me are remembered for their power. But Josephine, it is your name that still lingers in my heart, the only name that ever mattered. It is not the empire that endures, but the love that we shared. Even though the world has forgotten, I will never forget you. Your memory will always remain with me, until the end of my days. Section 2, I gave everything to my family, but they still resisted my will. Blood ties, they say, are stronger than iron chains. And yet, I, a man who bent nations to his will, could not hold my own family together. My brothers and sisters, raised from obscurity to the pinnacles of power, turned on me as if I were a tyrant to be overthrown. Oh, how the throne twists even the purest hearts. I gave them crowns, kingdoms, the world at their feet. Joseph, I made you king of Spain, a realm rich in history and glory. Louis, I entrusted you with Holland, and Jerome, the youngest of us, with Westphalia. Caroline, you ruled in Naples, and Pauline and Elisa, I gave you titles, wealth, influence. What more could I have done for you? What more could I have given without losing myself entirely? But no. It was never enough. My siblings, my blood, the companions of my childhood, how quickly you turned to quarrels, dissent, and defiance. Did the weight of the crowns I gave you become too heavy? Or was it that the Bonaparte pride, so strong in me, burned just as fiercely in you. Joseph, you resented me for meddling in Spain, as if I had not bled for your throne. When I placed you there, I did so with the conviction that you would secure the empire in that critical region, but you failed to hold it. Your failure in Spain was one of the empire's greatest defeats. The Spanish refused your rule, and the British played their part, undermining your authority. You allowed the throne to slip away, Joseph. Was it the burden of the crown? Or was it your reluctance to truly serve the empire I had built? You were more concerned with your own comfort than with fulfilling the mission that I had entrusted you with. Your failure was not just Spain's, it was mine too. Louis, you refused to follow my commands, clinging to your ideals of independence while the empire teetered on the edge of chaos. I made you King of Holland with the expectation that you would strengthen the empire's influence in Northern Europe. But your refusal to adopt my policies, your insistence on maintaining your own autonomy, weakened the very structure I had worked so tirelessly to build. You failed to align with the empire, and your actions led to the erosion of the union we had sought to forge in Europe. The Dutch people were loyal to you, yes, but you were not loyal to me, your brother and emperor. How could I trust a kingdom to you when you sought to go your own way, abandoning the empire when I needed you most? Even Jerome, my boy king, disobeyed when the times grew difficult. I gave you the kingdom of Westphalia, Jerome, in the hope that you would honor the legacy of our name and build something great. Instead, you became embroiled in scandal and controversy. Your lack of experience and wisdom led to disastrous decisions. I fought so hard to secure your crown, and yet, you squandered it, choosing to indulge in your passions rather than rule with the strength that the empire needed. You disgraced yourself, and your kingdom fell to ruin, just as my hopes for your success did. And the sisters, ah, my dear, ambitious sisters. Caroline, you schemed in Naples, ever dissatisfied, always plotting. How often I had to step in to save you from your own miscalculations. You wanted power, yes, but at what cost? Your constant restlessness, your pursuit of more, made you blind to the loyalty I needed from you. You could never be content with what you had, always seeking more at the expense of everything else, including the empire we were building. Pauline, Elisa, you were no strangers to intrigue either. Your loyalties were as fleeting as the courtly whispers that passed behind my back. You, too, wanted more, but you never understood that the empire was more than just a vehicle for your ambitions. It was meant to be a legacy, one that would survive through the generations. And yet, you both contributed to the infighting that tore us apart, undermining the very foundation that had been built with such hard work and sacrifice. He pauses, his hand tracing the map with a mix of frustration and longing. Do you think I enjoyed controlling your every move? That I reveled in your resentments? No, I wanted you to succeed. I wanted to create a dynasty, a Bonaparte legacy that would last through the ages. But instead of unity, we were a house divided, a family of kings and queens who could not find peace among ourselves. The empire, my grand vision, could have been the beacon of stability and greatness, but you, my own flesh and blood, chose to undermine it, to destroy it piece by piece. It is a lonely thing, to stand above the world and find no solace among those you hold most dear. When I needed your loyalty, your counsel, your love, you gave me rebellion and scorn. You saw the throne, the power, but not the brother who built it all. Even in exile, as I sat on that forsaken rock of St. Helena, I wondered, did you think of me, your brother, the man who gave you all that you possessed? Or had the thrones I forged become more precious than the bond we once shared? He clenches his fists, his voice breaking slightly. Perhaps I was too controlling. Perhaps I tried to shape you into shadows of myself, forgetting that you, too, had your own dreams and desires. But I ask you now, as I asked myself then, was my ambition my sin, or was it yours that tore us apart? Was it my fault that I expected you to rise to the occasion? I gave you everything, and yet, it was never enough. I watched you tear apart the very empire I had created, and yet I still wonder, was there another way? Could I have made you understand? He straightens, his tone now somber but resolute. History will remember me as an emperor, a conqueror, a man who reshaped Europe. But I will always remember the boy who played with his brothers and sisters on the shores of Corsica, dreaming not of crowns but of companionship. I will mourn that boy, and the family we could have been. I took my family from obscurity to the highest thrones in Europe. Joseph, Louis, Jerome, Caroline, Pauline, Elisa, we were a dynasty, a force to be reckoned with. And yet, the very thing I thought would unite us, power, prestige, was the wedge that drove us apart. The crowns I gave you became burdens too heavy to bear, and the pride of the Bonaparte name, which had served me well, became our undoing. What was the cost of all this power? What did I truly gain? The throne of France was mine, but I lost the family I once knew. The empire I built was vast, but it was built on shifting sands, and when the storm came, it crumbled. Alone, on St. Helena, I realized that no victory could replace the companionship of those I loved, the family I tried so desperately to hold together. And so, as I look back, I see not an emperor, but a man who failed at the one thing that mattered most, family. We were once together, united by blood and ambition, but in the end, ambition tore us apart. Perhaps it was not the world that was too cruel, but our inability to understand each other. That was the real tragedy, Josephine, the empire, the battles, the crowns, all of it was nothing compared to the family we could have been. He turns away from the map, his silhouette framed by the flickering light of a dying fire, and exits the chamber. Section 3, I left my soldiers, it almost ended in tragedy. Ah, Egypt, land of pharaohs and secrets buried beneath the sands. How grand our dreams were when we set foot upon your ancient soil. I promised glory to my men, a new chapter in the annals of France, and in my heart, I believed it. But what is belief when it collides with the weight of reality? We landed on the shores of Egypt in 1798, driven by ambition, drawn by the allure of ancient history and the potential to reshape the future. I sought to establish a new empire, one that would secure France's dominance in the Mediterranean, disrupt British trade routes, and claim the legacy of Egypt's grandeur for ourselves. The campaign was to be my crowning achievement, a moment that would forever etch my name alongside the greatest conquerors. But the reality of Egypt was far from the glory I had imagined. We marched under a burning sun, the deserts testing the mettle of even my bravest soldiers. The heat was oppressive, the dust stifling. We faced constant challenges, from unfamiliar terrain to the constant threat of disease. Our victories were carved into the history of this land, Abu Qir, the pyramids, but the glory came with shadows. The battle at the pyramids, though a victory, came at a high cost. The men fought bravely, but the toll on our forces was evident. More troubling still, disease began to spread through our ranks like a thief in the night. Malaria, dysentery, and plague began claiming the lives of my soldiers faster than any enemy could. I could see it in their eyes, the weariness, the doubt. The men who had followed me across Europe, those who had fought for me in Italy, now questioned whether the dream of Egypt was worth the suffering. And to make matters worse, our supply lines grew thinner by the day. The resources we had so carefully brought with us were dwindling rapidly. We had no reinforcements from France, no relief in sight. The sands, indifferent to our struggles, swallowed our footsteps as if we had never been there. It was a slow death, the kind that gnaws at your soul. I had led them to this land, and now I was leading them into ruin. And then came the whispers, news from home, a France ripe with chaos, opportunity, and the void of weak leadership. The revolution had taken its toll on the country. The Directory, the governing body of France at the time, was ineffective and crumbling under pressure. My name, they said, could be the answer to the cries of the Republic. To stay in Egypt was to risk stagnation, to let the tide of destiny slip through my fingers. But to leave was to abandon those who had followed me, bled for me, trusted in my vision. I received word that France needed me, that there were calls for my return. I felt the pull of power, the weight of destiny on my shoulders. I had risen from the Corsican nobility, through sheer will and brilliance, to become the savior of France. My place was not in the deserts of Egypt, but in the heart of Europe, where the future of my empire would be decided. But the decision to leave Egypt was not an easy one. Do you think it did not tear at my soul to leave my comrades behind, to see the faces of men who had fought beside me, now left to weather the storm without their general? The men who had followed me into the unknown, the ones who had believed in my vision. They trusted me. They followed me into the burning sands, into a campaign that seemed to promise riches and glory, but had delivered suffering and hardship. And now, I was leaving them. Some called me deserter, opportunist, even coward. And perhaps, in the cruel light of history, they are not entirely wrong. But tell me, what would you have done? Would you have stayed, watching the dreams of empire crumble in the sands of a foreign land, while the motherland cried out for salvation? The calls from Paris were impossible to ignore. France was in turmoil. The Republic was unstable, and I, with my growing influence and military prowess, could be the answer. To stay in Egypt would be to risk everything, to allow the opportunity to slip away. But to leave was to abandon those who had followed me, to leave them behind in the desert with nothing but their faith in me. It was a decision that haunts me to this day. I did not make this choice lightly. The weight of it pressed down on me as I boarded the ship, the sails catching the wind as I left behind my soldiers in the harsh desert. I could hear their voices, their cries, as if they followed me, pleading for me to stay. I could see their faces as I turned my back on them, knowing that some would not survive the desert, knowing that I was leaving them to face their fate. Even now, I feel the ghosts of those men haunting my victories. They were left behind, yes, but not forgotten. My triumphs in France, my ascent to the consulate and beyond, were built on the sacrifices we made together in Egypt. They paid the price for my future. Do you see the paradox? To serve my destiny, I had to betray it. To be the savior of France, I had to abandon those who had saved me. It was a bitter pill to swallow. The victory I achieved when I returned to France, seizing power in the coup of 18 Brumaire, was not without its cost. My return to France marked the beginning of my rise to the top, but it was also the beginning of the reckoning I would face for my decision to abandon Egypt. My reign as first consul and later emperor was marred by the knowledge of those I had left behind. The French people hailed me as a hero, a man who had brought stability to a fractured nation, but in the quiet moments, I could hear the cries of the men who had followed me into Egypt, who had bled for me. History will judge me as it sees fit. Perhaps I deserve the scorn of those I left behind. Perhaps the world will see me as a man who used others for his own gain, a man willing to abandon those who trusted him for the sake of power. But know this, every step I took, every crown I claimed, every empire I built, carried with it the weight of that decision. Egypt remains a scar upon my soul, a testament to the cost of ambition. The battlefields of Europe, the crowns of France, the grandeur of the empire, all of them pale in comparison to the weight of that decision. The sands of Egypt swallowed my footsteps, but not my guilt. I left my men to the desert, but it is I who remain forever marked by that barren land. My legacy is one of triumph, yes, but also of sacrifice. I gave everything for the glory of France, but I lost something along the way. I lost the trust of those who had followed me, and that is a loss that no victory can redeem. He pauses, his voice softening as he looks out toward the horizon, a mixture of pride and sorrow in his eyes. It is said that the sands of Egypt have the power to swallow men whole, to erase all traces of their presence. But for me, Egypt will never be forgotten. It is etched into my very soul, a reminder of the price of ambition, the cost of greatness. And as I look back, I cannot help but wonder if it was worth it. Was the empire worth the price of those who believed in me? Or was it the dream that betrayed me in the end? He turns away, his silhouette framed by the fading light, and walks slowly into the distance, leaving behind the echoes of history. Section 4, They betrayed me and sent me to certain death. Ah, Egypt, land of pharaohs and secrets buried beneath the sands. How grand our dreams were when we set foot upon your ancient soil. I promised glory to my men, a new chapter in the annals of France, and in my heart, I believed it. But what is belief when it collides with the weight of reality? We arrived in Egypt in 1798, at a time when my star was rising in Europe. The revolution had already turned France upside down, but I had found my place in its storm, achieving victory after victory. The French Republic needed a leader, and I had become that leader. With ambition in my heart, I set my sights on Egypt, not only to strike a blow against British trade routes but to gain a foothold in the East, to secure the legacy of France as an empire that spanned continents. We marched under a burning sun, the deserts testing the mettle of even my bravest soldiers. The land was hostile, and yet we pressed on, conquering one city after another. Our victories were carved into the history of this land, Abu Qir, the pyramids, but the glory came with shadows. Disease spread like wildfire among our ranks, malaria, dysentery, and the unbearable heat claimed more lives than any battle. Supplies dwindled, and morale wavered. The men, once eager to follow me into glory, began to question their purpose in a foreign land where death seemed as inevitable as the endless desert. And then came the whispers, news from home, a France that was still in turmoil, a France that needed me. The Directory was weak, the Republic crumbling, and a call to arms echoed across the land. My name, they said, could save France. To stay in Egypt, to remain in this desolate land, would mean risking everything I had built. And so, I made the decision to leave Egypt, to return to France and to answer the call. It was a decision that would come to haunt me. I abandoned my soldiers in the desert, left behind the very men who had bled for me, fought for me, believed in me. I knew the consequences of my actions. I knew they would call me a deserter, an opportunist, a coward. But I could not ignore the call of destiny. France needed me, and I had to answer. I returned to France in 1799, and within months, I had seized control of the government. The coup of 18 Brumaire was a triumph that would set me on the path to becoming the ruler of Europe. But Egypt remained a scar upon my soul. I had abandoned my men, my comrades, and their voices haunted me as I marched toward power. The victory I achieved in France was built on the backs of those who had fought and died with me in Egypt. I could never forget that. But the echoes of Egypt grew fainter as I claimed more power. I crowned myself emperor in 1804, and for a time, it seemed that nothing could stop me. I reshaped Europe, brought it to its knees, and for a while, it seemed as though my empire would last forever. The victories at Austerlitz, Jena, and Wagram were followed by the coronation of my family members as kings and queens, securing a Bonaparte dynasty that seemed destined for greatness. But power, as I have learned, is fleeting. It is built on a foundation of ambition, and ambition, as I have seen, can quickly turn to ashes. It was during these years, at the height of my power, that I began to understand the price of my ambition. The very empire I had built began to crumble under the weight of its own contradictions. My family, whom I had raised from obscurity and given the world, began to turn on me. Joseph, my brother, whom I had made king of Spain, resented my interference. Louis, who I had entrusted with Holland, defied my orders. Jerome, my youngest brother, was a king who could not rule. My sisters, Caroline, Pauline, and Elisa, were not immune either. They plotted, they schemed, and their loyalty, like that of my soldiers in Egypt, was fleeting. The war with Britain, the Peninsular War, the Russian campaign, each was a blow to my empire. The balance of power in Europe shifted, and soon, I found myself fighting battles on multiple fronts. My forces were stretched thin, my empire teetering on the brink of collapse. And it was in these moments of uncertainty that I realized, I had built an empire, but I had done so at a great cost. The cost of human lives, the cost of trust, the cost of family. Then came the crushing defeat at Leipzig in 1813, the retreat from Moscow in 1812, and the eventual abdication in 1814. I was exiled to the island of Elba, a small, barren rock in the Mediterranean. It was a bitter blow, but I could not give in to despair. I escaped from Elba, returned to France, and briefly reclaimed the throne in what became known as the 100 Days. But the battle was already lost. At Waterloo in 1815, I was defeated once more. The world, it seemed, had had enough of Napoleon Bonaparte. This time, I was exiled to St. Helena, a remote island in the South Atlantic. It was here, in this forsaken corner of the world, that my fate would be sealed. How cruel is the wheel of fortune, to lift me so high, only to cast me down into this abyss of solitude. I ruled Europe, I reshaped it with fire and steel, and now I am left to rule over my own despair. The walls of Longwood House close in around me, damp and cold as the grave. My court is no longer filled with advisors and generals but with silence, broken only by the howling wind and the scorn of my jailers. My throne has become this worn-out chair, my empire these barren rocks. The winds that howl through the island's cliffs are the only echoes of my once mighty empire. Do they think they have silenced me? That by exiling me to this wretched isle, they have erased the mark I left upon the world? Let them try. Let them burn my statues, rewrite their histories, and speak my name with venom. Yet they cannot undo what has been done. I am Napoleon, and I shall endure in the hearts of men, if not as a hero, then as a storm that swept through history. But history is cold comfort in the dark hours of the night. When the pain in my body becomes unbearable, and my thoughts turn to the past, I see faces, not of my enemies, but of those I loved and lost. Josephine, my sweet Josephine, your laughter echoes in my mind, a melody that mocks my solitude. My son, my dear little king of Rome, will you even remember me as I was, or will you grow to believe the lies they tell of your father? Betrayal, how it stings worse than any wound received on the battlefield. Betrayed by those I trusted, abandoned by those I called friends, and even by France herself, the nation I gave everything to. Do they not see? My victories, my defeats, my ambition, it was all for her. For France. And now, she has cast me aside, like an emperor without a crown, a man without a country. Perhaps this is justice. Perhaps I dared too much, reached too high, and this exile is the price I must pay for my hubris. But even here, even now, I remain unbroken. My spirit is not confined by these rocks. No, it soars over the Alps, crosses the plains of Austerlitz, and marches with my soldiers to the drumbeat of glory. And yet, as the sun sets over this desolate island, I cannot help but wonder, when I am gone, what will remain of me? A conqueror? A tyrant? A savior? Or merely a man, flawed and mortal, who dared to dream too grandly? Let them say what they will. My life was no ordinary life. I lived as few have ever lived, and though I die here in isolation, I leave behind an echo that will never fade. Saint Helena may claim my body, but my soul belongs to history. And history, my friends, is where I shall remain.